Hi everybody, Tom Coyle of Adventures in Leadership. Today I want to talk about legacy and failure. You see, today is President's Day, February 18th, 2019. Initially, this day was called Washington's birthday, signed into law by Rutherford B. Hayes. And then it kind of became associated with both Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and then today we call it President's Day. So I want to talk a little bit more about both Lincoln and Washington and what they had to do to get to the legacies we know them as today. George Washington, known as a great general, founder of our country, was actually not that great of a general. If you go back to the French and Indian War, he was a disaster. I mean, if you want a case study in failed military leadership, see George Washington, French and Indian War. When he became leader of the Continental Army, it didn't get much better. In fact, he lost more battles than he won. The most important thing he didn't do was give up. And sure, he had some bold victories like the Christmas raid crossing the Delaware River. And then, of course, he cornered the British at Yorktown for the final surrender. But man, there were many in Congress calling for the relief of George Washington because of his disastrous failures. And then when he was being nominated to be the President of the United States, there were quite a few naysayers on this one. But he's known as the founder of our country. And the most important thing, in my view, that he did is he stepped down, the first person in history to willingly step down from power and say, hey, you know what? It's time for me to move on, go back to farming. It was unheard of. And yet he had a life of failure to get to where he was, where he became an effective president in steering our country, guiding it to the success it would eventually become many, many, many years later. In fact, that's the thing about legacies. Legacies sometimes take time to appreciate. And when George Washington stepped down, he was not universally loved. There were quite a few people who weren't so fond of his accomplishments. Same thing with Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln failed at everything he did until he became president. Think about that. Think about that when we start picking people to lead. I mean, based on his track record, Abraham Lincoln had no business being president. He couldn't get elected office. He failed in any elected office he had when he was working in lower offices. He was a failure as a lawyer. He tried to enlist in the army, and he was a failure at that. Everything he did turned to coal, not gold. And yet he became president. But in that moment of the presidency, he became a resounding success. Or was he? Again, at the time, there was a lot of controversy. The Republicans, when we got to put somebody else in office, 1864, when his re-election was coming around, and Democrats, man, they were salivating at the chance to unseat him, and things were going that way until they had some late victories by the Union Army that sort of saved Lincoln, so to speak, and saved his presidency. And when he left office, he certainly was not universally loved. Obviously, John Wilkes Booth, regrettably, expressed his opinion on Lincoln. And obviously, the South didn't like him for obvious reasons, but even people in the North, who actually favored his positions against slavery and the Union, they were bothered by the steps he took on executive power. It was only years later that we appreciate Lincoln for what he was. Same with Washington. And so that's the thing is, in the modern context, when you evaluate leaders, whether we're talking about guys like Steve Jobs or whoever that hero is that we're trying to portray as this great person, sometimes it takes a while to realize whether someone's really that great or not. And maybe people who appear to be failures today, decades later, may be remembered as successes. Take Richard Nixon. The man resigned in disgrace. A few decades later, we recognize some of the genius of the Nixon presidency. His opening of relations with China. Liberals credit him for signing into law the creation of the EPA. Michael Moore actually calls Nixon the most liberal president we ever had. So sometimes it takes distance from the person's life to really judge how great or terrible they really were. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I welcome your thoughts. What do you think of leaders today and how we judge them? Thanks for watching, and have a great day.